Baby won't sleep? Why it happens, and what actually helps, from 6 weeks to 6 years. A parenting guide from Creative Minds Montessori. If you're running on broken sleep and quietly wondering what you're doing wrong, it's almost certainly nothing. Fragmented sleep is normal infant and toddler biology, not a parenting failure, and it gets better in small steps, not overnight. Here's why it happens, what parents try, 3 approaches that tend to work, and the red flags worth a pediatrician's ear. Here's what almost no one tells you at the hospital: waking at night is biologically normal. Sleeping through the night, as an unbroken 8 to 12 hours, is closer to a cultural expectation than a developmental milestone. Even adults surface briefly between sleep cycles. Newborns sleep about 16 hours a day, but only 1 to 2 hours at a stretch. A newborn's fragmentation isn't something you caused. Babies don't settle into regular sleep cycles until around 6 months, and their bodies don't reliably produce their own melatonin until about 3 months. Before that, they physically can't tell day from night on their own. And sleep regressions are development, not backsliding. They cluster around growth spurts, new skills like rolling, walking, and talking, and transitions like a move, a new sibling, or starting daycare. The brain reorganizing shows up as broken nights, and most last about 2 to 6 weeks. So when a so-called unicorn sleeper falls apart at 4 months, nothing broke. Their brain was upgrading. Parents have wrestled with infant sleep for as long as there have been infants. What's new is the pressure around it. The idea that a baby should be trained to sleep alone on a schedule traces to Western physicians of the late 1800s and early 1900s, who prized independence and efficiency over what we now understand about infant development. Then add the phone. At 2 a.m. you now scroll an endless feed of conflicting advice that spikes anxiety instead of calming it. And social media serves up a highlight reel of other people's babies sleeping 12 hours, exactly the comparison that makes an already exhausted parent feel like a failure. Used well, though, the same phone is how a good white noise app or a shared sleep log with your partner actually helps. Here are 3 of the most common moves, honestly. The first is chasing the perfect method, reading 5 books and switching techniques every few nights. The catch is that head-spinning inconsistency is often worse than an imperfect routine held steady. The child never gets a pattern to learn, which is exactly what stretches a normal 4-month regression into a months-long one. The second move is doing whatever ends the crying tonight, nursing, rocking, or lying down with them. It's a completely reasonable survival move, but if it becomes the only way they can fall asleep, every normal night waking now requires you. And the third is negotiating, one more story, one more song. To a child who struggles with transitions, bargaining signals that bedtime is open for discussion, which only extends it. None of these make you a bad parent, they just backfire in specific ways. Often one parent carries the invisible sleep load, tracking the naps, reading the books, waking at the first whimper, while the other sleeps through. Hold this as a tendency, not a rule. It's about roles, not gender, and it maps onto single-parent and same-sex families too. Left unspoken, that load builds quietly until it starts to feel like resentment. What helps is naming it out loud and sharing the actual wake-ups, splitting the night, or one parent taking the early shift and the other the 5 a.m. When both adults run the same routine and the burden is genuinely divided, the child gets consistency, and neither parent is left carrying every night alone. The principle underneath all 3 methods: children sleep best with predictability and a gradual on-ramp, never a sudden shock. You're not trying to make a child sleep. You're building the conditions that let sleep happen, and letting them practice doing a little more of it on their own. Match the tool to the age, pick one thing to work on, and give it real time before you judge it. The first method: build one short bedtime routine and never change it. A consistent sequence works because it becomes a signal. Run the same 3 or 4 calm steps in the same order every night, and within a week or 2 the very first step, the bath say, begins telling your child's brain that sleep is coming. It's the order and predictability that do the work, not the specific steps. Keep it short, 20 to 30 minutes, and identical, with the last steps in the room where your child actually sleeps and the lights already low. For a newborn it's barely a routine: dim the lights, feed, swaddle, white noise, into the bassinet drowsy. It won't work yet, but you're laying the pattern early. For toddlers and preschoolers, keep it boringly identical while handing over small choices inside the fixed frame: which pajamas, which 2 books, so they feel some control. Give it a week or 2 before deciding. The one thing that reliably undoes it is loading the final stretch with stimulation, roughhousing, a screen, bright bathroom lights, which switch the brain back on exactly when you're trying to switch it off. The second method: move the clock in 15-minute steps, not one big jump. A child's internal clock resists sudden change but adapts smoothly to gradual ones, the same reason you'd ease through jet lag rather than lurch through it. 15 minutes sits just under the threshold that triggers resistance. To pull an early riser later, shift bedtime, the last nap, and the official start of the day 15 minutes later every 2 or 3 nights, keeping the room dark and boring until then. The most powerful lever is the morning. Waking, opening the blinds, and eating breakfast at the same time daily is what truly anchors the rhythm, because morning light is the body's primary signal for setting its clock. With a baby, protect the afternoon nap, since an overtired baby wakes earlier, not later. The classic mistake is rescuing the early riser with milk, a show, or simply getting them up, which to a small child turns 5 a.m. into the most rewarding moment of the day. The third method: loosen one sleep association at a time. We all fall back asleep the same way we first fell asleep, and everyone, adults included, surfaces briefly between sleep cycles all night long. So if your child drifts off nursing, rocking, or with you beside them, every one of those ordinary wake-ups now needs you to rebuild the same conditions. The goal isn't to strip away comfort, it's to let your child rehearse the final few minutes of falling asleep a little more independently. The method is deliberately small: keep everything else identical and soften just one step. If they feed to sleep, move that feed earlier: feed, then a book, then bed. Lay them down drowsy but awake and reassure with a hand on the chest, doing a little less each night. For a toddler, the gentle chair method works well. Add comfort elsewhere: extra cuddles earlier, so nothing feels taken away. And the single biggest reason parents decide nothing worked? Switching methods every 3 nights. Pick one, and let it breathe. A crying baby at 2 a.m. isn't manipulating you, they can't yet. They're wired to call for a caregiver because, for almost all of human history, that's what kept them safe. And a toddler's one more story isn't defiance either. Going from the warm, connected bustle of the evening to alone in the dark is a genuinely big ask for a 3-year-old. Seeing the behavior as an unmet need or a hard transition, rather than a power play, changes what you do next, and it's usually gentler and more effective. Sleep is where home and childcare either reinforce each other or quietly pull apart. A good program helps in ways that are easy to underestimate: nap routines that mirror the language and rhythm you use at home, trained caregivers who notice patterns: she's been fighting the afternoon nap all week, she may be ready to drop to one, and a daily note on how and when your child actually slept. Daytime sleep isn't a nice-to-have. For young children, the nap is when the brain consolidates what it learned that morning and resets mood for the afternoon. A skipped nap usually resurfaces as a 4 p.m. meltdown and, counterintuitively, a harder bedtime, because an overtired child fights sleep rather than surrendering to it. So a strong program treats the nap as part of the day's design, not an interruption to it. This is the real test. Children's sleep needs vary enormously, and a quality program plans around the individual rather than forcing one clock on the whole room. When you're choosing a program, ask specifically what they do for the child who can't or won't sleep. The right answer is never, we make them lie there. It's rest plus a quiet alternative. After a genuine wind down, a non-napper can look at books, do a quiet puzzle, or work with a calm solo activity, so they still get a restorative pause. This follow-the-child individualization is central to Montessori. And it shifts a lot by age. Infants sleep on their own schedule, not the room's, so a good program follows each baby's cues for several naps a day. Toddlers usually settle into one solid afternoon nap, and this is where a caregiver's observation matters most, because the 2 naps to 1 transition is bumpy and very individual. Preschoolers are often ready to give up the nap, so good programs shift to a shorter quiet time, lie down, then quiet activities, instead of demanding sleep. The communication that makes all of this work runs 3 ways. You to the center, share your child's current nap needs, the bedtime routine, and what you're working on, so they can echo it. The center to you, real nap times and what they observed, not just, good day. And looping your child in at an age-appropriate level. When school and home run the same predictable rhythm and the same nap expectations, the child stops getting 2 different sets of rules, and that consistency is often the missing piece. Most sleep struggles are normal and pass, but loop in a professional if you notice loud snoring, gasping, or long pauses in breathing during sleep, a possible sign of sleep apnea. Also, if sleep is getting dramatically worse over months with no clear trigger, or a school-aged child is never rested despite adequate hours. And if your own exhaustion is tipping into hopelessness, not coping, that's a real health issue that deserves care as much as your child's sleep. Please tell your doctor. This isn't medical advice. When in doubt, call your pediatrician. Here's the real truth about children's sleep: it's art, not science. The right answer depends on this child's temperament, your family's values and setup, and what you can actually sustain at 2 a.m. The books describe an average baby, you're raising a specific one. Trust what you observe about yours, give any approach a couple of weeks, and measure success gently, not by a flawless 12-hour night, but by the first morning the hallway stays dark a little longer. For the full guide, and more parenting resources, visit creativemindsmontessori.com/parenting.